Imagine discovering that the getaway car in a bank robbery actually has an engine under the hood that could, like, completely cure pollution.
Right. Yeah.
The vehicle itself is undeniably dangerous. It's involved in a crime, but the machinery inside is doing something absolutely fascinating. Today, we're looking at one of public health's most infamous villains, and we're going to unpack a massive medical paradox.
It really is the absolute definition of a biological contradiction.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a chemical that completely shatters the neat black and white narrative of how we usually view toxic substances.
Welcome to our deep dive into the deeply paradoxical and honestly surprising science of nicotine. We've got a wildly eclectic stack of sources to go through with you today.
Very eclectic. Yeah.
We are pulling from virology reports, dense neurological studies, clinical data on some highly controversial alternative medicine claims, and get this, we're even pulling insights from databases that track the venom of carnivorous marine snails.
Which I know sounds like science fiction, but it's
Yeah.
very much real cutting-edge pharmacology.
So our mission for this deep dive is to completely separate the smoke from the substance. We want to explore how isolated nicotine actually affects the brain and the immune system.
Exactly.
We're going to unpack its contrasting roles as a highly addictive stimulant on one hand and a surprisingly potent anti-inflammatory on the other.
It's a crazy duality.
Plus, we'll investigate why modern medicine is currently studying it for everything from long COVID to Parkinson's disease.
Because when you look at the chemical reality of nicotine on a cellular level, it's far more complex than the combustible delivery system it's most famous for.
Right. So whether you're catching up on medical science for your own research or you're just wildly curious about how a heavily stigmatized chemical might hold hidden biological secrets, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you view your body's internal signaling system.
I really think it will.
And to really get into this, we kind of have to rewind to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's really where this whole modern paradox first emerged.
There was this moment that basically forced the scientific community to look at the chemical entirely separately from the cigarette.
Yeah, so let's think about the basic pathophysiology of smoking for a second. The respiratory risks are undeniable, right?
Absolutely.
Combustible smoke compromises the lungs, destroys tissue, damages the cardiovascular system, causes cancer. I mean, we all know this.
Right. If your lungs are already coated in tar and physically damaged, a severe respiratory virus should just, tear through that demographic.
Exactly. So when a novel, highly aggressive respiratory virus like SARS-CoV-2 hits the global population, the logical assumption across the medical board is that smokers are going to be the absolute hardest hit.
Right. But that's not what happened.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
The early data coming out of hospitals painted a very different, highly confusing picture. There was a Greek cardiologist and researcher named Dr. Konstantinos Farsalinos,
Okay.
and he started analyzing the patient data coming out of hospitals in China, Europe, and the U.S. He was specifically looking for the correlation between severe COVID cases and smoking.
And what did he find?
He found a significantly lower than expected prevalence of current smokers among hospitalized COVID-19 patients.
Wait, really? How much lower are we talking? Give me an example of the discrepancy here.
So in his analysis of the data from China, he found that only about 6.5% of hospitalized COVID patients were smokers.
Well, nearly half of all men in China are smokers.
Right.
If the virus was hitting everyone equally or hitting smokers harder like you'd assume, that hospital number should be massive.
The numbers just didn't align with the expected risk at all. Now, Farsalinos is extremely careful in his reports to clarify that this does not mean smoking is good for you.
Of course.
Smoking remains a deadly habit that kills millions. But during the same period, South Africa actually implemented a complete nationwide ban on the sale of cigarettes to try and halt the transmission of the virus.
Banning cigarettes entirely overnight. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for the most stressed out black market in history.
Which is exactly what Farsalinos points out. He argued the South African ban lacked empirical data and mostly just empowered illicit trade.
Yeah, naturally.
But his statistical anomaly regarding the low hospitalization rates forced scientists to ask a very uncomfortable question.
Which is?
Is the nicotine itself doing something protective against the virus?
Oh, wow. Which brings us right back to that getaway car analogy. The cigarette is destroying the lungs, but the isolated chemical inside might be fighting the virus.
Exactly. This observation became known as the nicotinic hypothesis.
Okay.
The theory suggests that the COVID virus causes chaos by disrupting specific receptors in the human body called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors.
That's a mouthful.
It is. So we just call them SAIRs for short.
Yeah.
The hypothesis proposed that nicotine, because it perfectly fits into these exact same receptors, might be interacting with them to potentially reduce the runaway inflammation caused by the virus.
Okay, I want to really dig into the machinery of those receptors because I've heard neuroscientists like Andrew Huberman talk about how aggressive nicotine is in the brain.
Oh, absolutely.
If we're going to understand how nicotine could possibly help a viral patient, walk me through that hijack. What is it actually doing to our neural pathways?
Well, to understand the hijack, you have to understand the brain's normal operating system first.
Makes sense.
Your brain naturally produces a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. It's a fundamental molecule for memory, learning, and keeping your attention focused.
Okay.
Think of your nicotinic receptors as the locks on your brain cells, and acetylcholine is the natural key.
Got it.
But nicotine has a molecular structure that mimics acetylcholine so perfectly that it acts as a master key.
A master key. Wow.
Yeah, it easily crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds directly to these receptors. According to the neurobiology data, including Huberman's insights, it has a particularly strong affinity for one specific lock in the brain called the alpha-4 beta-2 receptor.
And what happens when it picks that specific lock?
It triggers a massive release of dopamine in two critical areas of the brain, the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, or VTA.
Right, and dopamine is the craving and reward molecule. It's what makes us feel motivated.
Yes. So when nicotine hits that pathway, it generates a profound feeling of well-being, alertness, and satisfaction.
Wow.
It is basically pushing the gas pedal on your brain's reward system. But here is the fascinating biological twist.
Okay.
Simultaneously, nicotine decreases the activity of a completely different neurotransmitter called GABA.
And GABA is the brain's brake pedal, correct? It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter that calms things down.
That's the one. So think about most standard stimulants, like caffeine or prescription amphetamines. They just bang away at your sympathetic nervous system.
Right, they wake you up.
Yeah. But if you've ever chugged 3 cups of coffee just to focus on a spreadsheet, you know that jittery, anxious, heart-racing feeling?
Oh, definitely.
Nicotine has a highly unusual dual effect. It increases arousal and sharpens your focus by pushing that dopamine gas pedal, but it simultaneously reduces your anxiety by cutting the GABA brake line.
Wait, so it's giving you the laser focus without the panic?
Exactly.
Plus, the sources mention it's also binding to receptors that increase your resting metabolism and actively suppress your appetite.
Right.
When you lay it all out like that, it completely explains why people struggle so much to quit. If you stop smoking cold turkey, your brain is suddenly losing its dopamine reward, its anxiety reduction, and its appetite suppression all at the exact same time. It's a massive physiological crash.
It is. And, we can't ignore the genetic component here either, because not everyone experiences that crash the same way.
Really? How so?
The research highlights that your DNA plays a massive role in how your brain handles this chemical hijack. There's a specific variant in a gene called CHRNA5.
Okay.
This gene is responsible for building a different receptor subunit called alpha-5.
How does that variant actually change the experience for someone?
Well, it fundamentally alters your risk for severe dependence. Normally, your brain has a built-in aversion pathway.
Like a warning system.
Yeah. If you consume too much nicotine, a circuit in your brain involving an area called the medial habenula utilizes a hormone called GLP-1 and a transmitter called glutamate to send a very clear message.
Which is?
I feel dizzy, I feel nauseous, stop smoking.
Okay.
But if you have this CHRNA5 variant, that warning system is muted. Your brain doesn't send that dizzy, nauseous signal as strongly.
Oh, wow.
So instead of feeling sick after your first few puffs as a teenager, you just get the massive dopamine reward. It basically fast-tracks you to addiction.
That's incredible. So it's not a character flaw or a lack of willpower. It is a highly complex neurochemical cascade based on how your individual receptors are built.
Exactly.
But this brings up a massive question. If nicotine rewires the brain's reward center so aggressively, isn't it highly dangerous to introduce it to non-smokers, even if we think it might have medical benefits for a virus?
And that right there is the crux of the current medical debate. The brain receptors explain the potent addiction and the extreme focus. But it's the receptors on the body's immune cells that explain nicotine's surprising physical effects. This is where we bridge the gap between neurobiology and virology.
Because these receptors aren't just sitting in our skulls. The sources detail a specific subtype, the alpha-7 receptor, that is found directly on our immune cells.
Yes.
We're talking about T cells, B cells, and macrophages like the actual foot soldiers of our immune system.
What's really fascinating here is how the nervous system physically talks to the immune system.
Okay, tell me about that.
When a molecule of nicotine binds to one of these alpha-7 receptors on a macrophage, it activates a biological circuit called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway.
And what does that pathway do?
It effectively sends a signal deep into the cell, telling it to stop producing pro-inflammatory cytokines. Specifically, it blocks the release of proteins known as TNF-alpha, IL-1, and IL-6.
Let's translate that for a second. Those cytokines are basically the chemical alarm bells of the immune system, right?
Right.
When the body detects an injury or a virus, it dumps those cytokines into the bloodstream, and they cause swelling, fever, and tissue damage to try and, burn out the invader.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And by silencing those specific alarms, nicotine acts as an incredibly potent anti-inflammatory. This mechanism is exactly why researchers are currently testing transdermal nicotine patches for chronic conditions like pulmonary sarcoidosis.
Sarcoidosis is a brutal disease. I mean, it causes these tiny clumps of inflammatory cells to grow in your lungs. It mimics a dozen other illnesses and causes this crippling, life-altering fatigue.
It really is. And the traditional medical treatment for sarcoidosis is to prescribe harsh corticosteroids.
Right.
But steroids come with terrible systemic side effects over time, like inducing diabetes or causing cataracts.
Oh, man.
In recent clinical trials, however, nicotine patches are bringing patients real relief. The nicotine is reducing the inflammation and triggering a helpful release of adrenaline, all without the severe metabolic damage of steroids.
Wow, just from a patch.
Yeah. Scientists are also exploring this exact same pathway for treating gout, rheumatoid arthritis, and even using nicotine as a pharmacological chaperone to protect degrading neurons in Parkinson's disease.
So, if your immune system is a highly trained security force, nicotine acts like a diplomat stepping in and telling the guards to stand down and lower their weapons.
That's a great way to put it.
That's fantastic if the guards are confused and accidentally destroying the city, like what happens in an autoimmune disease, or the runaway cytokine storms we saw in severe COVID cases.
Exactly.
But shutting down your security force sounds terrible if a real dangerous invader is actually at the gates.
And that is the double-edged sword of immune suppression. The literature details some very alarming negative effects of this diplomat stepping in.
Like what?
Well, a Penn State study looked at periadolescent mice that were infected with herpes simplex virus 1. When those mice were exposed to nicotine, their natural production of something called interferon gamma was severely suppressed.
What does interferon gamma normally do?
It's the signal that calls in the cavalry. It activates your T cells to actually fight the virus.
Oh, I see.
So, by suppressing it, the nicotine effectively turned off the body's natural viral defense system. We see a similarly dangerous contradiction in hepatitis C research, too.
What happens there?
In a controlled lab setting, nicotine actually inhibits the hepatitis C virus from replicating on its own.
That sounds good.
It does. But when you combine it with interferon alpha, which is the body's natural antiviral response, the nicotine disturbs and blunts that defense mechanism.
Wait, so it's fighting the virus, but also fighting the body's natural attempt to fight the virus.
Exactly. It creates biological confusion. Furthermore, in non-neuronal tissues, chronic exposure to nicotine can inhibit a process called apoptosis,
Which is?
programmed cell death. When a cell becomes damaged or cancerous, it's supposed to receive a signal to self-destruct for the good of the body.
Right.
And nicotine can block that self-destruct signal, allowing mutated cancer cells to survive and proliferate.
Jeez. So it is an incredibly powerful master switch, but flipping it comes with serious, potentially lethal consequences.
Absolutely.
And because nicotine is such a potent diplomat for calming an overactive immune system, it has recently become the center of a massive and honestly highly controversial trend regarding long COVID.
Yeah, this is where the laboratory science really spills over into the public sphere.
Right.
Social media is currently flooded with anecdotal reports of people experimenting on themselves. They're buying over-the-counter 7.5 milligram nicotine patches and wearing them, usually for periods of 6 to 24 days, to treat persistent long COVID symptoms.
We're talking about debilitating brain fog, chronic muscle fatigue, and the lingering loss of taste and smell that haunts people for months or years.
Exactly.
Tying this back to the nicotinic hypothesis we discussed earlier, the theory is that the leftover viral particles are clinging to these alpha-7 receptors, right? Causing chronic low-grade inflammation and dysfunction in the nervous system. So the idea is that the patch delivers a steady stream of nicotine to outcompete the virus, bind to the receptors, and hit that anti-inflammatory reset button.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
And according to medical reporting by Verywell Health, there are indeed several small case reports showing positive results. You have patients reporting full recovery of their physical strength, the return of their senses, and the complete lifting of brain fog within days or weeks.
Wow.
However, and this is a big, however, mainstream science urges extreme caution here.
Naturally.
This is an experimental, off-label use of a chemical. Nicotine is a stimulant. It artificially raises your heart rate and your blood pressure.
Yeah.
That carries very real cardiovascular risks, especially for a patient whose heart or lungs might already be compromised by a severe viral infection.
Now, before we get into the specifics of the alternative medicine claims surrounding this, I want to pause and make something crystal clear for you listening. We are acting purely as your tour guides through these source materials today.
Yes, very important.
We aren't endorsing these viewpoints, and we certainly aren't handing out medical advice or taking a side against the mainstream medical consensus. Our goal is strictly to lay out the full, fascinating spectrum of theories currently circulating about this chemical.
An important distinction to make, because within these sources, we have the claims of Dr. Brian Ardis, who has become a prominent and highly vocal advocate for nicotine patches.
Right.
He promotes nicotine not just as a treatment for long COVID, but as a potential miracle cure for multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, arthritis, and myocarditis.
That's a huge claim.
In his reference materials, he claims that 100% of long COVID symptoms are eradicated in just 6 days using a 7-milligram patch.
He also makes a very provocative claim regarding addiction, which kind of challenges everything we just talked about regarding dopamine.
He does.
He cites a 2016 Harvard study that evaluated FDA documents, and he claims this proves that pure nicotine alone is not what makes tobacco products so highly addictive.
Right. His argument focuses on the manufacturing process. He argues that the FDA allows 599 different chemical additives in commercial tobacco products.
Wow, 599.
Yeah, and specifically, he points to 15 chemicals known as pyrazines. Dr. Ardis argues that it is this engineered chemical cocktail that truly creates the deadly, unbreakable addiction, rather than the isolated pure nicotine itself.
He also points out a dietary fact that I think blows a lot of people's minds. Humans consume pure nicotine every single day in nightshade vegetables.
We do.
Eggplants, tomatoes, and white potatoes, which obviously includes French fries, contain the highest natural levels of nicotine found anywhere on Earth outside of the tobacco plant itself.
It's true.
But hold on, let's inject some logic here. If we're eating naturally occurring nicotine in our French fries and pasta sauce all the time, why aren't we violently addicted to ketchup? Why don't people experience withdrawal when they skip a side of potatoes?
It's a great question, and it really comes down to pharmacokinetics.
Okay, break that down.
Dosage, delivery speed, and how your body processes chemicals. A typical cigarette contains about 1 milligram of absorbed nicotine.
Okay.
But when you inhale combustible smoke, that chemical travels from your lungs into your bloodstream and hits your brain's reward center in a matter of seconds. It is a violent, aggressive, unnatural spike.
So it's the speed of the spike that triggers the brain's addiction circuitry.
Precisely. A transdermal patch, by contrast, offers a slow, steady, controlled release over 24 hours. And when we talk about dietary nightshades, the amount of nicotine in an eggplant is measured in nanograms. You would have to eat over 20 pounds of raw eggplant in a single sitting just to equal the nicotine content of one single cigarette.
20 pounds. Good luck with that.
Right. Furthermore, when you eat it, the chemical has to pass through your digestive system and your liver.
Oh, okay.
The liver is incredibly efficient at metabolizing and filtering out toxins before they ever reach the brain. So eating a tomato is a completely different physiological event than inhaling smoke.
Okay, so pure nicotine is a fantastic immune diplomat, and it might not be the sole villain in tobacco addiction, but it still comes with the baggage of being a habit-forming heart stimulant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a messy tool. Is anyone trying to build a cleaner version of it? Can we get the anti-inflammatory benefits without the cardiovascular risks?
We can try. And to find those precision tools, scientists are turning to some of the most exotic and deadly creatures on the planet, marine cone snails.
I love this part of the research. It sounds like it was ripped straight out of a sci-fi novel.
It really does. There's a massive scientific database called Conoserver that tracks things called conopeptides.
Conopeptides.
Yeah, these are the highly complex venoms produced by carnivorous marine snails that hunt fish and worms in the ocean. Over millions of years, these snails have evolved venoms that instantly paralyze their prey by perfectly targeting specific nicotinic receptors.
So instead of a blunt instrument like a cigarette that activates the whole nervous system at once, the snail venom acts like a biological sniper rifle.
Exactly. For example, a snail called Conus aulicus produces a venom peptide called alpha-conotoxin AUIB.
Okay.
This specific venom selectively blocks only the alpha-3 beta-4 receptor, which is the one that controls the release of norepinephrine.
Wow.
Another snail, Conus macus, produces a venom called MII that exclusively targets the receptors, controlling dopamine release.
Wait, how does deadly venom actually help us build medicine, though?
By studying how these venoms perfectly fit into these microscopic locks, pharmaceutical companies can map the exact 3D shape of our brain's receptors.
Oh, I get it.
They can use that map to design synthetic drugs that mimic the anti-inflammatory action of nicotine to heal the lungs without ever touching the dopamine reward pathways or spiking the heart rate.
It is just wild to think that the cure for modern inflammatory diseases might be hiding in the venom duct of a deadly snail from the Indo-Pacific.
It is.
But the source material shows it's not just marine snails. Researchers are also looking closely at the chemical byproducts of tobacco itself to fight viruses.
Yes. A recent, highly detailed study published in Nature Communications looked at molecules derived from nicotine pyrolysis.
What's pyrolysis?
It's just the scientific term for what happens when you burn something at high temperatures.
Gotcha.
They discovered a specific molecule created during this burning process called 3-vinylpyridine, or VP.
Okay.
In their lab testing, VP acted as a highly potent antiviral against SARS-CoV-2.
Wait, how does it actually stop the virus?
Well, the virus relies on something called the main protease to multiply. You can think of this protease as a pair of biological scissors that the virus absolutely needs to replicate itself.
Okay, scissors.
This VP molecule fits perfectly into the hinge of those scissors, a microscopic spot called the S1 pocket, and it jams it completely. It prevents the virus from multiplying.
Proving that even though burning a tobacco leaf and inhaling the tar is a terrible way to deliver medicine, the underlying chemical architecture of nicotine actually holds the blueprint for future antiviral drugs.
It is the ultimate scientific example of separating the smoke from the substance.
This has been an incredible journey. We set out to understand a paradox, and we've seen just how beautifully and sometimes terrifyingly complex human biology truly is.
It's amazing.
Nicotine is a profoundly powerful molecule. It is undeniably a potent stimulant capable of ruthlessly hijacking the brain's reward center and mutating cells. Yet, at the exact same time, it serves as a precision master switch, a chemical diplomat capable of suppressing runaway inflammation and potentially holding the key to treating debilitating diseases.
It absolutely forces us to move past the black and white thinking of public health. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've established that our bodies are fundamentally hardwired with millions of these nicotinic receptors spread across our brains and our immune systems.
Right.
And we know we are constantly consuming microdoses of natural nicotine every time we eat a tomato salad, an eggplant parmesan, or a side of potatoes. Is it possible that our baseline immune function, and perhaps even our daily moods, are actually being subtly regulated by the hidden chemical language of our diets?
Wow. That changes how you look at dinner.
Perhaps we aren't just eating food to survive. Perhaps we are constantly, unknowingly medicating our immune systems with every single bite.
Just a little something to think about the next time you order fries. We want to thank you for taking the plunge with us today, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.